The air in the shelter was a stale, thick blanket, heavy with the scent of damp concrete, fear, and too many unwashed bodies. Above, the world groaned and shrieked, a symphony of destruction that shook the very foundations of their underground refuge. Zarmina Rahimi, 18 years old, sat huddled against a rough-hewn wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed on the oblong black case beside her. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay her cello, a silent, beautiful relic from a life that felt impossibly distant. Days had merged into a single, unending twilight down here. The faint, flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, distorting the familiar faces around her into masks of anxiety and despair. Whispers, muffled coughs, and the occasional soft sob were the only human sounds daring to challenge the ominous rumble from outside. Noor, her older cousin, sat nearby, her face etched with the exhaustion of weeks spent trying to keep spirits from fracturing entirely. Her eyes, usually sparkling with wit, were dulled and bloodshot. Across from them, 7-year-old Amina, Noor's little sister, was curled into herself, clutching a tattered doll, her small face pale and unresponsive. Her boundless energy had been extinguished like a candle in a gale. Zarmina traced the outline of the cello case with a trembling finger. The instrument felt like a cruel joke in this place. What use was music when bombs fell? What comfort could a cello offer against the grinding gears of war? Yet, an insistent yearning stirred within her, a quiet protest against the suffocating silence of their despair. She remembered the last time she'd played. A bright, bustling concert hall, filled with the warmth of an appreciative audience. The rich, resonant wood of the cello vibrating against her body, the bow dancing across the strings, weaving stories of beauty and longing. Now, that memory felt like a dream, fragile and ethereal, threatening to vanish completely. A particularly violent tremor ran through the shelter, rattling the exposed pipes and sending a fine dust sifting down from the ceiling. A collective gasp rose from the occupants. Amina whimpered, burying her face deeper into her doll. "It's too much," a man muttered, his voice hoarse. "It will never end." A wave of dread washed over Zarmina, threatening to drown her. This was their new normal, a constant state of terror, punctuated by moments of acute, bone-shaking fear. But as she watched Amina, small and helpless, and saw the defeated slump of Noor's shoulders, something shifted within her. The yearning intensified. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about defiance. Noor caught her eye, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "It's been too quiet, hasn't it, Zarmina?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant thrum. It wasn't a demand, but an invitation, a gentle nudge towards a forgotten part of themselves. Zarmina hesitated for a long moment, battling the fear that clawed at her throat. What if they thought she was selfish? Insensitive? But the silence, the crushing weight of it, was doing more damage than any sound could. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the clasps of the case. The clicks echoed unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. As she opened the case, revealing the gleaming dark wood of the cello, several heads turned, curious and bewildered. A few older women shot her disapproving glances, as if she were about to conjure a jinn. But Amina's head lifted, her dull eyes fixed on the instrument, a tiny spark of recognition catching there. Zarmina carefully lifted the cello, its weight familiar and comforting in her arms. The wood felt cool against her cheek as she rested it against her shoulder, the endpin finding its purchase on the rough concrete floor. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her fingers trembling as they tightened around the bow. What peace! Something from home. Something with the soul of their land. She closed her eyes, searching for a melody that spoke not of war, but of the resilience of their people, of the mountains and the rivers, of the laughter around evening fires. Her bow kissed the strings. The first note was hesitant, a low, mournful sigh that seemed to absorb all the sadness in the room. It vibrated through the concrete, through the soles of their feet, a deep, resonant hum that cut through the oppressive silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One man coughed, a signal of his displeasure. But Zarmina kept playing. The melody, an old folk song her grandmother used to sing, began to unfold. It spoke of enduring love, of the changing seasons, of sorrow, yes, but also of profound hope. The notes, at first tentative, grew stronger, bolder. Her fingers, stiff from disuse and cold, gradually found their old dexterity. The cello's voice filled the shelter, a rich, soulful lament that seemed to hold their collective pain in its embrace. Amina had crept closer, her tiny hands wrapped around her knees, her eyes wide with a fragile wonder Zarmina hadn't seen in weeks. The fear in the child's face hadn't entirely vanished, but it was now softened by an unadulterated fascination. Nor watched Zarmina, a single tear tracing a clean path down her dust-streaked cheek, a small, grateful smile gracing her lips. As the music flowed, something remarkable began to happen. The huddled figures slowly, almost imperceptibly, started to uncurl. Shoulders relaxed. Breaths deepened. The constant background hum of the invasion outside seemed to recede, replaced by the warm, human sound of the cello. It was a temporary reprieve, a fragile bubble of peace in the heart of chaos. Zarmina herself felt it. The fear still coiled in her stomach, but the act of playing, of pouring her essence into the music, became a shield. Her bow moved with more certainty, her fingers danced with a new-found grace. She closed her eyes, letting the melody guide her, letting it speak for all of them. Suddenly, a deafening blast tore through the ground above. The entire shelter convulsed. Lights flickered violently, then plunged them into near darkness, saved only by the dim, battery-powered emergency lamps. A collective scream ripped through the air. Dust rained down, stinging eyes and filling lungs. Everyone cried out, huddling together, convinced this was the end. Zarmina flinched violently, her bow hand faltering. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped her. She could have stopped, could have dropped the cello and joined the others in a desperate embrace. But then she looked up, her gaze sweeping across the faces contorted in pure, unadulterated fear. She saw Amina, frozen in terror, her small mouth open in a silent cry. She saw Noor, her eyes wide with despair. And in that moment, something ignited within Zarmina. A fierce, defiant spark. If the world was ending, it would not end in silence. It would not end with only the sound of destruction. She took a ragged breath, squeezed her eyes shut, and brought the bow down with renewed force. The notes that followed were no longer mournful, but a defiant roar. A powerful, surging melody, raw and visceral, a protest against the brutality above. She played with every fiber of her being, pouring her fear, her anger, her desperate hope into each vibrating string. The cello thrummed against her body, a living, breathing entity. Its voice swelled, battling against the groans of the shelter, the rattling of structural supports, the distant, relentless hammering of the invasion. It was a battle of sounds, the mechanical, destructive force against the organic, life-affirming power of music. The resonance filled the concrete bunker, pulsing through the very air, becoming almost a physical entity. It wrapped around them, a cocoon of sound, holding them together. For a few impossible moments, the sound of her cello felt stronger, more real, than the chaos outside. It was a desperate prayer, a fierce lament, a defiant declaration that humanity would not be silenced. Slowly, agonizingly, the barrage began to subside. The tremors lessened. The rattling quieted. The groans of the shelter faded into a low hum. And as the last, trembling notes of Zarmina's cello hung in the air, a profound silence descended. It was a different kind of silence this time. Not the oppressive silence of despair, but a hushed, reverent quiet, heavy with shared experience. Zarmina's body was shaking, her muscles aching, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands, still clutching the bow, were numb. She opened her eyes slowly, cautiously, to survey the shelter. Faces, once contorted in terror, now bore a strange mixture of awe and relief. Tears streamed down many cheeks, But they weren't all tears of fear. Some were tears of catharsis, of a shared release. Amina, released from her paralysis, scrambled towards her, her small arms wrapping tightly around Zarmina's leg. "Don't stop, Zarmina," she whispered, her voice muffled but insistent. "Please don't stop." Noor knelt beside them, her eyes wet, but her smile was wide and genuine. "You brought us back," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You brought us all back." Around them, people slowly stirred. Whispers of thanks, grateful nods, even a few tentative smiles. The crushing weight that had pressed down on them for weeks had lifted, just a fraction, but enough to breathe again. In the days that followed, the invasion continued its brutal march above ground, but something fundamental had shifted within the shelter. Zarmina's cello became its heartbeat. She played daily, sometimes for long uninterrupted stretches, sometimes just a few pieces, whenever the despair threatened to overwhelm. She played songs of sorrow, yes, but also of yearning, of quiet defiance, of the vibrant, beautiful world they remembered, the world they hoped to reclaim. The music wasn't just noise. It was a ritual, a source of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest corner, beauty could persist. People started engaging with each other again. Hushed conversations turned into shared memories. Small acts of kindness, once rare, became more frequent. The fearful isolation began to give way to a fragile sense of community, bound together by the resonant chords of Zarmina's cello. Amina, now almost always close by, would hum along to the melodies, sometimes tapping rhythms on her legs. Her eyes, once hollow, now sparkled with a renewed light. She watched Zarmina's fingers, her bow, her posture, with an intensity that spoke of burgeoning inspiration. The child would often mimic Zarmina's movements, a tiny, hopeful echo in the confined space. The future remained terrifyingly uncertain. The war raged on, its outcome unknown. But in the damp, concrete confines of the bomb shelter, Zarmina's music had carved out a space for humanity, for hope, for the enduring power of the human spirit. She was no longer just a girl who played the cello. She was a beacon in the darkness, a keeper of the flame. Her music wasn't just notes and melodies. It was a defiant promise, a communal prayer, a steadfast whisper against the roar of the world. And as Zarmina drew her bow across the strings once more, filling the shelter with a song of unwavering hope, Amina's small voice joined in, a soft, fledgling hum, a testament to life, and the inextinguishable power of art, even amidst destruction. The music continued, a lifeline stretching bravely into the unknown. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.